What is it?
It's time to go back. Welcome.
Hey there, welcome back to Generation S. It is a podcast about growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s. I'm Dan Kemp, and today, a bit of a twist to kick off the spooky season. Love October, by the way. It is my favorite time of year. Halloween is my absolute favorite holiday of the year, and it certainly stems back from childhood, from my love of horror movies, which I'm sure I've talked about a little bit on here, but not a whole lot. But that is what today's episode is going to be all about. I am actually going to be sharing with you an episode from a sister podcast to Generation S that I have created and host. It is called Beer Before Fear, a podcast where the beers are cold and the bodies are colder. It's pretty straightforward, actually. My buddy Erik and I, we actually review craft beer and horror movies, and we pair them together for what usually promises to be a pretty interesting discussion, to say the least. And so this week, I wanted to share one of our earlier episodes. We're almost to episode 10 at this point. We're well on our way to episode 10, but I want to share an episode from way back when we first came out over the summer. It's going to be discussing a classic 90s horror movie, and one that I think shaped horror movies for decades to come, in all seriousness. And I'm talking about Scream from 1996, directed by Wes Craven. So I'm going to play that episode for you today in hopes that maybe you'll check it out if you like beer or scary movies. It could be a fun podcast to get into your rotation. I will warn you, though, it is not for children's ears. Certainly have dropped a few F-bombs on the Generation S podcast, but on that show, there is zero holding back, at least from my perspective. So certainly not one you want to have on in the car with the kids, but certainly one you do want to have on if you want to hear us talk about beer and scary movies, because that's what it's all about. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode of Beer Before Fear on Generation S. Back to Beer Before Fear. I'm Dan.
And I'm Erik.
And this is a podcast where the beers are cold, but the bodies are colder. This is a beer and horror movie podcast, guys. And let's, you want anything we want to touch on before we get to the brewskis?
Well, we got to talk about what movie we're talking about.
Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do that later? It's in the title, folks. Fuck it. We are talking about 1996 Wes Craven's Scream.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Oh, I know, Kazam, where Shaq plays a dope genie.
I mean, that's just a little better than Blue Chips.
There it is.
Yeah.
All right, but listen, before we get to the fear, let's talk about the beer.
You got to crack yours, too.
Oh, right. Hold on. Let's crack it.
So let's talk about this beer.
Oh, there it is.
That sounded real nice.
It did, didn't it? Yeah.
Real nice. So I kind of want to talk about why I picked this beer. So Scream was filmed in Northern California.
Okay.
Unlike our previous episode.
Yes.
That was filmed in California, but actually supposed to take place in Illinois.
Yeah.
This was filmed in California and supposed to take place in Woodsboro, California.
Yep.
And so this is, so Northern California is kind of the OG for Imperial West Coast IPA.
Okay.
And so the beer I picked is from Fremont Brewing.
Okay.
This is technically based out of Seattle, but it's a beer called Hustle. It's a double IPA, but is a double or Imperial West Coast IPA.
So what is the meaning? Okay, so because I've seen Imperial before, and I know it's a real fancy term, but what is? I mean, is there a reason for it?
Yeah. So I mean, basically, it's about alcohol per beer. Basically,
alcohol content.
Content. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So you have your IPAs, which are, 6% to 7.5. Then you have your 7.5 to 9.5, and then your 9.5 to however. And that goes single, double, triple, right?
Yeah.
But Imperial could also take the place of both double and Triple.
So it's more of a generalized term.
More of a
once you-
generalized
once you
term.
get past
Yeah.
a certain percentage or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm looking here on the can, and this is a doozy, man. And I
Oh,
was
Yeah. What does this can look like?
well, the
Like,
can
what
itself.
do you? Yeah.
My first thoughts of this can, just look as far as the artwork and whatnot. I'll tell you the first thing it reminds me of because I'm looking here at a skull with a little beanie cap on.
Are you gonna say Goonies?
I was gonna say Goonies.
No. Yes.
I was gonna say Goonies.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that what was inspiring the artwork? Do we know? Or
What is that? Eye patch Willie? What is that?
One-eyed Willie?
One-eyed
which is
Willie.
totally a penis reference.
I know. I wasn't gonna say it.
That's okay. I did. But no, this is a 9%er, guys. I'm excited to try this, and I'll just see if I can make it through the whole episode.
Well, it's
with
good
it.
because you haven't had a beer since last episode, which was last week, right?
That's
So-
right. Well, 2
yeah.
weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, 2 weeks ago. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
so
right. Yeah,
I should
yeah.
be okay.
So yeah, pretty much again, this beer is a Imperial West Coast IPA. The movie was filmed in Northern California, which again is kind of like the home for Imperial West Coast IPA, notably Russian River's Pliny the Elder.
Okay.
It is like the OG of the OGs when it comes to West Coast, in my opinion.
Yeah.
West Coast, incredibly drinkable, double or / Imperial IPA. So
Well, and because I've noticed that too. Yeah. Let's go ahead and pour it real quick, and then
Yeah.
I'll talk about it.
yeah, oh, that looks nice. That looks so classic.
Oh yeah. Hold on. I never bartended, so this is a terrible pour. But
I remember my first beer.
normally I don't pour my beer into a glass. I normally just drink it out of the can.
Funny.
With the
All
bottle.
right, so I'm gonna riff real quick. Funny story. I'm at school in college, and my cousin Kenneth. We get blue moons, right?
Okay.
And he's a novice when it comes to putting fruit in beer, and I don't ever think you should put fruit in beer unless you're having Modelo or some sort of Caribbean lager or something like that, right?
Okay.
And then you put lime in it.
Because I know
Anyways,
Blue Moon, you put the orange.
yeah,
in.
so we're putting oranges into Blue Moon, and if you put orange into Blue Moon, especially in a bottle, it fizzes like crazy, right? Most of the time,
Well,
you're
it's the
gonna have to put
acidity
your
of the-
you're gonna have to you're gonna have to put your mouth over the bottle and make sure the fizz doesn't go everywhere. He didn't listen to instructions, or I didn't tell him instructions, and he puts the orange slice, shoves it down the bottle, puts his finger over it.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And shakes it like he's popping champagne.
Why?
I'm like, because he's a novice.
Oh my.
Poor
Okay.
guy. Like,
Yeah.
I think it was his first beer ever.
Oh geez.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were in college.
I just feel like I've never seen him anywhere to learn like shaking a beer like that. Like champagne, yeah, I get it. Unless he just felt like, oh, it's a bottled carbonated beverage. I got to treat it like champagne.
I mean, it was. I will never forget that moment.
Wow.
And he was just totally shocked. I'm like, "What are you doing? You just wasted a perfectly good Blue Moon."
Yeah. Well, listen, I while you were talking, I did snap a picture of my terrible pour. We'll pop it up on the brand new Beer Before Fear Instagram page. So make sure you give us a follow over there. A little shameless plug there.
Yeah.
But now, one thing, Eric, can we talk about the appearance here?
Yeah, let's talk about the appearance.
So-
What do you think?
I noticed. So a couple weeks ago, we had that. Was that one a double IP as well? A couple weeks ago for Halloween.
It was. Yeah.
So I'm noticing a big difference right out of the gate here. Is that this one is definitely not opaque like the last one. So what's going on there?
Yeah, good question. So Imperial West Coast or just West Coast IPA in general, generally going to have more of a translucent, either light straw to dark gold color. Usually when you get into like Imperials and whatnot, there's going to be a little bit maybe darker malt to make it a little bit sweeter.
Okay.
Or it's just going to have more malt in general, which sometimes can make it a little bit hazier or can make it just a little bit darker. Basically West Coast IPAs are going to be more translucent.
Okay.
And when it comes to East Coast or New England IPAs, like the last one we had 2 weeks ago, you're typically going to have unfiltered. So this will be filtered, the West Coast, and then you have the East Coast, which is unfiltered, maybe a little bit more. So you'll notice when we drink this.
Yeah. Well, here we go.
Like,
Let's
let's drink it. Well, I was going to say, you'll notice when you drink this, it's going to be, I'd say maybe a little bit like less well-rounded, maybe like a little bit, little less like creamy or smoother.
Okay.
It's old school.
Yeah.
So cheers.
Let's check.
Yeah.
Bottoms up. Here we go. Maybe not bottoms up. I'm not going to drink the whole thing, but
What? It's only 9%.
that's really good though.
It's good though.
That's
right?
really good.
But you notice how it gives a little more like that punch.
Yes. Well, I'm
Yeah.
noticing it on the back end there. It's
Like
got that.
tiny.
It's more. Well, it's what I when I drink an IPA. That's what I think of as an IPA.
Grapefruit.
It's just that kind of that. I don't want to say acidity because I don't know if that's what it is necessarily, but it's just that hard bite, right?
Mhm.
Where it's. I could drink So the last one from a couple weeks ago, I said I could probably only get maybe 2, and then I'm snoozing, or I'm just full, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
sure.
This one, I could probably do 3 and be. I mean, don't get me wrong, 9% would knock me on my ass, but in terms of just the feeling full,
That's a
it's
hard Saturday night.
fair. Yeah, that's true. But and maybe because it's more filtered or whatever, it doesn't feel as heavy as the one we drank before.
For sure.
So, but it's
Yeah.
really good. Like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's probably a little more drinkable from like just like you take a sip, you want another sip, right?
Yeah,
Like
well, that I would drink with a
Yeah.
meal instead of
Yeah.
the other one where I could drink instead of a meal almost because it
Again.
was so heavy.
Yeah, like again, like the other, like the hazier, unfiltered,
Yeah.
gonna have a little more body to it because there might be a little wheat, a little more oat.
Yep.
In there.
Well,
when
and there was
yeah.
like a sediment at the bottom I noticed too when I was, which is fine.
Well, that was yeah, that's more like so like hot matter and protein. Like anyways.
Yeah.
Not gonna get into it. It's very technical, actually. But no, I mean, like, you get that. You don't necessarily get that with these like filtered West Coast translucent IPAs.
Okay. Well, and again, very like you said, very drinkable. I
Yeah.
could see having a few of these with like pizza or wings or whatever.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah, this is like the ultimate like pizza.
Yeah.
It may be a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
If you could have like a really, really heavy, Chicago style pizza or something like that, but like airier, lighter New York style pizza.
Yeah.
Or like a California Pizza Kitchen.
Oh God.
Delicious.
I mean, if you want to call it pizza, sure, but
Yeah, that's true. I don't know what they call it in heaven.
Oh my God, whatever, dude. All right, delicious beer. Very excited about this. I'm looking forward to consuming this throughout the episode. So
I'm done.
all right. Well, yeah, man. So we're discussing Scream. So we talked about the beer. Let's move on to the fear, right? So 1996, Wes Craven's Scream, a truly phenomenal and monumental film. But let's start with the plot here. So here we go. In the small town of Woodsboro high school student Casey Becker receives a disturbing phone call from an unknown person who quizzes her about horror films and threatens her life. Her boyfriend, Steve, is eventually killed in front of her, and she is later attacked and murdered. And murdered by a person wearing a ghost face costume. The news media covers the story, and a police investigation begins. Sidney Prescott, whose mother was murdered a year prior, becomes the target of Ghostface. As the killings continue, suspicion falls on various individuals, including Sidney's boyfriend Billy and her own father. Ghostface targets the town's principal, and a party at Stu's house becomes the setting for the final confrontation. It is then revealed in a perfectly wonderful plot twist that Billy and Stu are in fact the killers and had orchestrated the murders, framing Sidney's father and seeking revenge for her mother's affair. Oh, dun dun dun. Sidney manages to turn the tables on them, eventually killing both Billy and Stu. With the police arriving, the survivors, including Sidney, Dewey, and Gail, are left to deal with the aftermath of the night's events.
Poor Cotton Weary.
Poor Cotton Weary. That's right. So Cotton Weary is the guy that was framed for the murder of Sidney's mother. Also played, by the way, by a very famous actor whose name escapes me. Why did I even mention that? Because I was like, surely I'm going to know his name by the time I get to the end of that sentence. And
This is the point in the podcast where we insert the cricket noise.
There it is. Yep.
No, I mean, you probably could have just done this. You could have said, here's the plot.
Yes.
This movie's the GOAT.
This is definitely up your alley more than me. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to start with you on this. So as far as your first memory watching this movie, like where did you see it? How old were you? The usual.
This is another Eric goes to sleep / stays awake until his parents go to sleep.
Okay.
Creeps downstairs, and there were these these channels. There were these channels on cable television that were this. I called them the squigglies. I don't know what you called them when you grew up.
Oh, like they
were the movie channels.
The scrambled. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The weirdos watched the stuff that was at the further channels.
That's right. Yeah.
Like channel 57, 58,
sure.
something like that. Before you got into the 60s.
Right.
They would be scrambled because they'd be HBO or something like that. We didn't subscribe to HBO. But my sister came home one day and she's like, I watched this movie Scream. She was telling me about it. And I'm like, I gotta watch this movie. Right? I gotta watch this movie. I've already seen Halloween. And
I mean,
so
yeah, you're basically an expert.
yeah,
at that
and
point.
so I looked at the old TV guide. This is just a repetitive story from the last time, but I looked at the TV guide. I saw it was coming on HBO or whatever, Showtime or whatever, and I basically watched the Squigglies, but listened to it.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So it's like a radio drama. For
Yes,
you.
but as far as like actually seeing it without the filtered or whatever, without the scrambled, I did. I did watch 2 before 1.
Okay.
Yeah, without like the again the scrambled and all that.
Yeah.
So I actually saw 2 before 1. But when I watched 1, I was just like, this is better than I could ever imagine.
Yeah.
This is the GOAT. This is the best horror movie. And I didn't even realize, which we'll get into later, just the intricacies of what this movie entails and like how the detail and like all the Easter eggs and all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, there's a ton of them, and we'll definitely we'll talk about those.
But I was hooked immediately.
Yeah. So for me, I had seen a little bit of it at a friend's house. Actually, it was my girlfriend in 6th grade. I was over at her house, and I know, right? And her parents were like, "You want to watch Scream?" I'm like, "Sure." And like,
wow,
I was like 11.
Her
Yeah,
parents were quite liberal.
Oh, they were. Yeah. Well, they took us to see Bride of Chucky in the theaters.
Oh,
yeah.
A classic.
I mean, I loved it at the time. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So anyway, ironically, that poster, the movie poster for that film, parodies Scream.
Does it really?
It does. If you ever look at the Bride of Chucky poster, it's the like the face with the eyes and just the scared look on the face.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's parodying Scream. Anyway, so that's how cool they were. So I started watching it there. And I remember I got to the scene where they were sitting at the fountain talking about how Casey and Steve were gutted, right? And I think I either told them to turn it off or I had to go home. Either way, I was done. I didn't want to watch that shit.
Really?
I was like, no, screw this. So I stopped watching it for some reason or another. Then I guess it was like 2 years later or maybe a year later, my sister and her fiance at the time took me to go see Scary Movie in the theaters. Which I saw and I loved. I thought it was amazing and hilarious.
So you actually saw Scary Movie before
to completion. Yeah, exactly.
To completion before you saw Scream.
Yes. So by the time I went and watched Scream, which I did go back and watch, I was like in college. No, I was out of college by the time I went back to watch Scream. And at that point, I'd already seen Scary Movie like 3 or 4 times. So I'm watching Scream going, it's not scary to me at that point.
Yeah.
It's hilarious because I'm literally picturing all the scenes the way they're acted out in Scary Movie.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. There's one scene where Sydney early on, she's being chased through the house by Ghostface, and she answers the door, and all of a sudden you see someone holding up the Ghostface mask, and she screams, and it's Dewey. And he's
Dewey.
like, "It's just me, Sid.
Yeah,
it's
and
cool."
he screams. He's
Right.
Ah!
Yeah. But then I just, in my head,
Doofy.
I'm seeing Doofy going, "It's me, Sid." So that's what I'm seeing in my head. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you cough.
No, it's
man.
fine.
Yeah.
Smell my finger.
Well, so obviously you can understand my conundrum here.
Yeah.
Or another example early on where, again, in
gosh.
Scream, where Casey's running away from Ghostface
Yeah.
and he just reaches up and he stabs her in the chest.
Yeah.
Right? I'm thinking, okay, Carmen Electra, and Ghostface stabs her in the chest and pulls out like an implant. It's
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
like, ugh.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's literally how I watch the movie. I'm like, I can't not laugh at this.
Those were I mean, as much as Scream defines the 90s like rebirth of slasher.
It's meta horror, basically.
Yeah, as much as that does.
Yeah.
Like Scary Movie like defines 90s humor.
Oh, it does. It was
Yeah.
such a, I mean, and
Scary Movie is like it's like, you know, it's like synonymous with like the Budweiser frogs.
Oh, it is.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think of those things together.
Yeah. No,
I don't know
mean,
why, but I do.
Well, and it's absolutely, you're 100% right. It is synonymous with like late 90s, early
Yeah.
2000s humor, you know, the
Yeah.
American Pie films. It was all kind of that
Ugh.
same. Yeah. So,
I mean, if I could go back.
Oh, I know. Everyone says that though.
I mean,
you know.
No,
Anyway.
it really is though.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was my memory of seeing Scream. And again, by the time I watched it as an adult, of course, it wasn't scary anymore. And again, if anything, it was just like hard not to compare it to Scary Movie.
Sure.
But I can 100% appreciate the, you know, just the fact that it really was groundbreaking because it was truly, you can't say it's fourth wall breaking
Yeah.
where like they're talking, because they're not talking to the audience,
Sure.
but they're addressing like just the silliness of slasher movies to the point where the villains themselves literally base their killing spree on old horror movies, which in and of itself, it almost makes it more realistic because like you always hear about in the news. Even back then they talked about it. Like in the news, there were kids that would try to act out scenes from movies and people got hurt.
I mean, the film, as far as Scream itself, it observes itself throughout the entire movie.
It does, yeah, but it does it in a way to where like it never goes too over the top in terms of like saying, okay, this is a satire. Like there's definitely, I mean, they talk about it within it, but at the same time, it still feels real.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's not afraid to make fun of itself,
right?
While not distracting from the primary purpose of the film.
And that's the thing. And it gets right back to, because they'll do that. They'll call out like, oh, in movies, this is where the killer would pop up for the final act or whatever. And sure enough, he pops up.
Always, you got to shoot him in the head because they all come from one last scare.
That's exactly. And that's exactly what happens.
And then Billy comes up and then shoots him in the
right.
head. Yeah.
But it doesn't, like now watching it, it's kind of funny. But like watching that back in the day, especially, I can imagine like, no, that's still scary because like, oh God, maybe this is like a movie,
Sure.
But again, I just most of the time I can't get scary movie out of my head when I'm watching.
Well, I mean, when it kind of culminates at the end when Sydney and Billy are about to do the deed,
right?
And he said, "It's all one big movie, Sid."
Yeah. And that's the thing I think that's what's really cool too, because what I love about this is that after the twist, right? That Stu and Billy that are doing this. When you go back and rewatch it, are you paying attention more to them and how they're reacting to situations to see if you can tell? Yeah. So like I like last night, because I watched it right before we started recording this, or I should say yesterday, just to get prepared for this. And I was like, okay, I know who the killers are.
Sure.
I'm going to pay attention to just how they act for most of the scenes that they're in to see if I can tell that they're either like suspicious or whatever. And there's definitely scenes where they'll give each other looks.
Oh, the fountain scene.
Yeah, 100% the fountain scene, exactly, where they're like talking to each other, and they're like Stu is just joking about it, and Billy's like, "Dude, knock it off, dude. Come on."
Oh, not in that. In a second, I'll talk about how it goes. Like before that scene, how you can
tell
going back. Obviously in retrospect, but when they're in the they're next to the fountain, and he's like, "Oh, how," and Stu in his super dorky, geeky, goofy way, he's like, "Oh, you gotta be a man to gut," he says it in that like California surfer. You gotta be a man to gut somebody. You take him from the spleen or whatever he says,
Yeah.
And he's like, "How about
subtlety?
How about subtlety? You fuck rag." Is what he says.
Which, by the way, is a fantastic insult.
Oh, it's super 90s.
Fuck rag.
Oh, that's a fantastic 90s. And so is smart guy. They say smart guy.
Yeah.
And this and it instantly brings me back to 8th grade.
Yes.
Oh, smart guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's. I feel like that's like a Tom Green
smart
insult.
Guy?
Yeah, you remember Tom Green?
I do remember Tom Green. Of course, I remember Tom Green.
That was amazing.
He was, still is. Yeah. Well, maybe he is. I don't know. Yeah. Hope he's doing okay.
What was that movie? What
from back then?
Yeah,
Freddy Got Fingered.
Freddy Got Fingered.
Yeah, man, groundbreaking.
I was gonna say somebody did Freddy or something like that. Yeah. Such a weird guy, but he was great. He was great.
Oh man, so. I confess I did not have a chance to do any research on this as far as any behind the scenes fun facts. Do you have anything that you managed to find?
No, let's move on. Of course I have something. So it's pretty simple. And it's actually the first scene, which is the most iconic scene in Scream. Maybe besides Act 3 in Scream is.
No, I think the first scene is like what you think of with Scream.
Sure.
100%.
Yeah.
Because they try to replicate it with every sequel.
Absolutely. Well, they replicate the reveal in every sequel as well.
True, yeah.
But it is so incredible because you take Casey Becker, who is Drew Barrymore.
Yeah. Who was like on the poster.
Literally, probably the biggest star, teen star at the time.
Yes.
Right? She was in just about everything. She was an icon. It's like if you were to put Taylor Swift in a movie and she dies immediately. Maybe not. She's huge, but you know what I mean? Like, and she dies immediately, right? But
you're thinking, top billing.
Yeah, you think she's going to be the star of the movie. And like she escapes and then that starts the movie and all that.
Well, you know where that comes from, right?
What's that?
That's from Psycho.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So you had that Jamie Lee.
That's right.
Funnily enough, Jamie Lee Curtis's mom.
Yeah.
Janet Lee, excuse me, not Jamie Lee. Janet Lee was Marion Crane and she shows up. You think, oh, she's the main character. She's the one trying to get away with all the money, whatever. She dies like halfway through the movie, and then all of a sudden it's like these other characters that pick up.
Yeah.
That's what inspired that. So that's more of that kind of meta horror.
Yeah, and it takes it a step further by it's the very first scene.
Yes, and they don't mess around.
That's incredible. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. So because again,
and that's why you listen, folks.
That's exactly why. Yeah, little fun factoids, obviously. So there's, yeah, I mean, she gets top billing and she's killed in like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. That's, that had never, honestly, at that point of a movie within the first 10 minutes or however long it was, never had happened before.
No, not with somebody that was well known. Like they've had random people.
Absolutely.
But when you go into this thinking, okay, this is a Drew Barrymore movie because she's on the poster and she's getting top billing, like she's the main character as far as you're concerned.
Yep.
Absolutely. They immediately subvert your expectations, which I think obviously sets the tone for the rest of the movie in terms of like those subverted expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyways, so some like fairly intriguing, I think probably somewhat well-known facts of this movie.
Yeah.
It was originally NC-17.
That I did not know.
Yeah.
I wonder what they had to cut out then. Do you know what they had to cut out?
They had to cut out like 6 frames. And that's it.
That's it? Okay.
That's it. But like, I think about this, like considering the shock and horror that we have, and when I think about things that were kind of first times, right? When it comes to horror, like taking it past what Scream was, you think of like Saw or Hostel.
Sure, yeah.
That was like shocking.
Yes.
Right?
But it was for the sake of shocking.
Now you have Green Inferno, which I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I have not, no.
Don't ever watch that. Horrible movie. It's Eli Roth.
I've seen like Hostel and stuff, but
it's like Hostel on steroids.
Really?
Oh God.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
It's a cannibal.
Oh yeah. No.
Yeah. It's.
I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched that one day and I will never recover. But like you think about the movies that came out like years following that probably never had a problem getting to rated R.
Right.
Hostel, Saw. All the Saw movies, like those were ridiculous. The guy sawed off his own leg. Like,
right, yeah.
Scream, they literally, you see somebody with guts hanging out. You don't even see the knife going in, right?
No, it's implied. But honestly, even the guts hanging out, like you never really saw that before.
You never really saw that before, but like it kind of made the callus a little bit stronger,
sure,
and then stronger, and then stronger.
Yeah,
and so like that's actually pretty crazy that that now would be like PG-13.
No, it would, and but every movie, as far as like just what we see or what have you, because and I want to talk about that, maybe not on this episode, but how like movies in the early 2000s and even now, like horror movies were like they're all PG-13, but they were still pretty scary. You know what I mean? So either the standards changed or they figured out a way to avoid an R rating and still be scary.
Would you say that Scream, as it is compared to the movies now, is basically child's play? No pun intended.
I would say, well, again, going back to the fact that they made a Scream TV show that was just as, in my opinion, just as gruesome as this.
Yeah.
Maybe not in terms of like all the guts and stuff all the time, but it was still a pretty violent show.
I never watched it.
No, and
it was MTV.
It was an MTV show, but I heard it was actually decent. I saw a little bit of it, but I didn't follow it through. But again, I know it pretty much parallels the movies. So,
what's your favorite Scream, by the way?
Scream?
Yeah,
it's got to be the original.
Really,
it's probably the one that I know them, like I can recall the plot the most. Like, I honestly probably couldn't tell you. Like Scream 2, I know she's in college. I don't know. I can't remember. I haven't seen Scream 3 or Scream 2 for that matter in about 15 years. So I know we're going to talk about them in future episodes.
Yeah.
No, we're definitely going. And by the way, folks, you may have, I just want to go meta for a second here. You may notice that the last episode, our first episode was about Halloween, and now we're talking Scream. So this is not going to be a horror franchise podcast, right? We're not going to go through every single movie in order of a franchise. We're going to jump back and forth. So we will absolutely be talking about the Scream movies in the future. Same thing with the Halloween movies, but they may not be in order. It's just kind of, what we're feeling. So just anyway, keep that in mind. Don't expect us to be a franchise podcast. If it is, and if you're hoping it is, tough shit. Anyway. So I got to go with this one, but just out of curiosity, because there's 6 of them now. So what would you say is your favorite one?
I think the cliche thing to say would be the first one.
Yeah.
But if we were in a world where the first one, let's just say I cannot select the first one.
Okay.
I'd say 6.
Yeah, the most recent one.
Yeah, or 5.
Okay.
5 or 6.
I have not seen 5 or 6 or 4 for that matter. I've only
I'd
seen
say
the first
actually,
3.
I'd probably say. I mean, 2's incredible.
Yeah.
But 5, people love 4 for
Yeah.
some reason.
The first reboot or whatever it was.
Yeah,
Right?
it was like 10 years later.
Yeah.
So I guess the Scream 3 was filmed in 1990 or came out in 1999, I think. Maybe
It's like 01.
No, it was 2000.
Yeah, because I think Scream 2 was like 98 or 99.
It was, yeah, that's right. And so it was 11 years later.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know, I thought it was well ahead of its time as far as like the motives and
Right.
like the way that they did it and all that. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, once we do Scream 4.
Sure, yeah.
50 episodes later when we're sponsored
Right.
and, everybody's, paying us to do
Of
this.
course.
And so anyways, yeah, no, I don't know. 5 was just, I don't know, maybe I was just thirsting for it.
Yeah.
I was excited. It was a new cast of characters while bringing back the original crew.
Right. It was
And some of the, and we won't talk about just the kills, but some of the people who were killed in that movie.
yeah.
You've seen it, right?
I have not. So honestly, yeah, don't spoil it for me
All
right now.
Well, we won't. We
No.
won't. But yeah, it was just fresh.
Okay.
It was fresh. It was like I was back in somewhat like 1996.
Because it was new.
It was a new way of doing it.
You didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, the motive was interesting.
Yeah.
Just like everything about it from start to finish was fresh.
Okay. All right.
So-
I'm excited. No, I want to watch them for sure. I never got past 3.
Sure.
And honestly, when I watched 3, 4 hadn't come out yet, and I just never went back to it.
Sure.
I know that's because we've gone and seen the Halloween movies together.
Sure.
And I know you've asked like in January, like, hey, you want to come see Scream with me? And we couldn't figure out the scheduling on it. So you went and saw it. You loved it. So
Opening night, baby.
That's right. There
Actually,
it is.
no, it was on Thursday.
Oh yeah, the night before. That's
Yeah.
opening night for most of these movies now, right?
Yeah,
It's the Thursday night
that's true.
showing or
That's true.
whatever.
I guess Wednesday's opening night now.
Is
It's
it?
like
They're
a
just going
sneak
back.
peek,
They're just going to go back to the week before now. So
Yeah.
whatever the release day is, they're going to go back a week,
Yeah.
and that's the new opening. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, any other fun facts about the movie or anything like that?
No, I do not believe.
Okay.
Actually, do you know this? Was this after Courtney Cox and David Arquette?
No, I think it was because of this movie that they
Was
got
it?
together.
Okay,
I think so. Yeah.
gotcha.
Because they got married in '99 and they lasted until about 2013.
Gotcha.
So
So this is a movie of love.
I mean, I guess it's the love story of Dewey and Gail. Yeah. Which again, I
The
want to call her
underpinnings of this movie are love.
absolutely. Yeah.
Love of movies, love
Love for each other.
on
Yeah.
the scene.
I mean, because that's the thing is that it's definitely got that kind of teen, that teen romance vibe to it,
Yeah.
which was a very '90s cliche that you wouldn't have seen in an earlier horror movie
Yeah.
from maybe the '80s.
Yeah.
But again, it brought in those, and it's funny because again, our first episode we talked about Halloween. That's like the crux of this movie in terms of understanding horror movie tropes, right?
Yeah.
Because there's that whole scene where they're sitting in the living room and Randy just goes into all the rules of a horror movie, and he's using Halloween as the example, which I
Yeah.
thought was hilarious.
Oh, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. So, yeah, it's a great movie. It really is. I will say a couple of things that I'm going to ding it for. This is just me personally. Is I feel like some of the dialogue is a little hokey, but at the same time, I'm also questioning is it supposed to be hokey because it's very meta? Like, is it purposefully hokey, or is it just dated dialogue because it's a 25-year-old movie?
It is, and all 6 of our listeners in this episode are going to be like, they're yelling right now at their car stereo or
at the gym on the treadmill.
At the gym on the treadmill.
Yeah.
People are looking at him like they're crazy. But yes, it is. It's being overly meta for being meta. Like it's absolutely. I mean, this entire movie is incredible.
Yes.
Right? Like the script that was written by Kevin Williamson. Like,
yeah,
it's incredibly savvy. It's smart.
Well, and it's Wes Craven who directed.
And with the directorial mind of Wes Craven.
Yeah.
Right? Like the horror genius that he is, he completely, with Kevin Williamson, reinvented,
reinvented. Oh, there you go.
and rejuvenated the slasher genre in a sense. Now it's a couple things. It's a whodunit. It's a teen movie.
Yeah.
Like, remember how teen movies were like, She's All That.
Oh, absolutely.
And all that. Like, those were like going on at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like teen movie, whodunit, completely aware of the horror stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right. So like with the first chase scene with Sydney,
Right.
she's like, oh, it's like she's talking to the killer. She doesn't know the killer's like, it's before he's like, which door am I at or whatever.
Oh,
or
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
You know, whatever. And she's like, oh, they're so the movies are so stupid. It's a big breasted girl that, you know, inevitably runs upstairs, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
What's the first thing she does?
She runs upstairs.
She runs upstairs.
Yeah. Like,
but like that's meant to like make fun of itself, but
Yeah.
at the same time, all to be serious and all to be extremely
well, because then you're asking yourself,
yeah.
would I have actually done the same thing in her situation, even though I made fun of it? Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, no, you're right. It is such a, I keep going back to the term meta, which I hate because of the way it's associated with Facebook now. Yeah. But it is such a perfectly crafted meta satire of horror, while at the same time still being a good horror movie, right?
It's incredible the tributes they give to Wes Craven and just horror movies in general.
Well, there was that scene early on. It was where Casey Becker, Drew Barrymore was there talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street movie. She goes, well, I like the first one, but the rest of them sucked.
Yeah.
It's because he had only directed the first one.
Yeah.
And the rest of them he didn't. And so that was kind of funny there.
Incredible Easter egg right there.
Well, and there's another one too. I think this one's probably less subtle, is where the Fonz, what's his face?
Yes.
Where he's talking to the janitor.
You're talking about Henry Winkler.
Henry Winkler, and he's talking to the janitor.
Yeah, and his name's Fred.
Did you know who plays the janitor?
It's Wes Craven.
It's Wes Craven. Yeah. And he's wearing the first Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy sweater without the stripes on it.
Yep.
And he calls him Fred.
Yep.
So anyway, I thought was...
He's like, huh? He's like, nothing.
No, I'm not.
Sorry.
Not you, Fred. Yeah. It's perfect. No, so it was good.
Man.
I tell you what it did, man, because it really, for me, again, when this movie came out, I was in elementary school, right? So I didn't have high school memories from that time, but it wasn't too much long after that I was in high school.
You weren't in elementary school, were you?
In 96? Yeah, so were you.
I was 11.
Yeah, you were in elementary school.
Yeah, that was elementary school, huh?
Yeah, we're like basically the same age, dude. In 96, I was in like 4th grade, so you were in maybe 6th grade.
It makes me feel better, at least. If I was in middle school, I'd be a little older.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And what I was getting at was, I was just saying that it gives me nostalgia for high school in the you know what I mean? Like, it's because it's almost like a period piece, because in addition to being a meta satire horror teen drama, like, it perfectly encapsulates 90s pop culture.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, it's
absolutely.
just and because of that, even though it's so perfectly 90s, it doesn't feel dated. Does that make sense? Like, you can look at it and see a movie that was clearly filmed in the 90s.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're like, I can appreciate the fact that it was so pop culture driven that, you know, and who knows, maybe somebody that's younger than us watching this would be like, oh, this is just an old movie. I don't know. Maybe we were the perfect age to have seen it when it came out, or when it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think it only relates to a certain age, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it can relate to anybody from baby boomers to generation, you know, I'd say Zennials. That's the Gen X to the, you know, the early, you know,
basically
Gen
if you're
Z.
born anytime in the late 80s or early to mid 90s.
Pretty much, like if you're born up to like 1991.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's incredible. But the Easter eggs, like, I think my favorite is, and I don't even think it's an Easter egg in this movie, but it's when I guess Billy kind of tells Sydney, like, hey, I'm the killer. Like,
right.
And it's after Stu. Also, let's talk about the theatrics inside the movie.
Yeah.
Not like planned for the movie, but inside the movie that Stu and Billy went to fake Billy's death.
Oh, yeah.
What? Like, what was he? How did he have all that, like, corn syrup all over him? Like, what?
They
did he have, like,
planned it,
pouches under him, like ketchup packets?
That's, I mean, something. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is they planned it out to make it seem like, okay, what would they have done when they made a movie about this, right? They were so, I mean, that's the thing, is they were two kids that watched way too many movies.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's so incredible that they were like, you know what? You're going to be having relationships with Sydney upstairs.
Right.
And then we're going to act like I kill you, and you're going to hit all these little ketchup packets under your tank top or white shirt that you're wearing.
Yeah.
And it's going to look like you're bleeding and dying.
Right.
And also, I'm going to like tear your shirt a little bit. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit too much into it.
No. I mean, with this movie though, you can, and that's what I think is so great. It's because
Yeah.
it's done so much already that you're like,
Sure.
surely that was intentional.
Sure.
That you can think about this and go, yeah, of course that fits right in with the narrative.
Yeah. But anyways, getting back to the Easter eggs, Billy basically tells Sydney, "Hey, I'm the killer," and he said,
Yeah.
"Well, we all go a little mad sometimes."
Oh yeah.
Which is incredible because it's just a tribute to going back to the original slasher.
Well, he straight up calls it out as Norman.
Psycho. He says
from Norman Bates.
He goes Norman Bates, Psycho, and then he talks about the pig's blood.
Yep, from
being
Carrie.
from Carrie.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So, I mean, the whole thing itself is
it's a love letter to horror movies.
It is insane, and that permeates throughout. In some ways, in the most recent one, but it permeates throughout the entire franchise.
Well, that's the thing, because Wes Craven, if I recall, only did the first one, right? Or did he do any of the sequels in terms of directing?
For Scream?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he did everything up until the fourth.
Oh, he did? Okay,
so
then
he passed away.
Yeah.
He passed away in between the fourth and the fifth.
Okay.
So he probably would have done the fifth and the sixth.
Okay, because I know like he didn't want to do more of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies because he didn't like what they wanted to do with it, but it sounds like this was definitely his baby, and they gave him control over how he wanted to proceed with it or what direction to take it in.
Yeah. I can't remember who did. I'd have to think about it, but whoever did the most recent ones, they're kind of like the next generation.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
But they do they do exceptional when it comes to like a tribute.
Sure.
To
I will say that about most movies these days that involve either like a reboot or a sequel that harkens back. Like, I think directors have really finally kind of wised up to like, okay, if we're gonna like reboot something that there's going to be already a fan base for, we better be very respectful of the source material, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's continuity from a previous, like again, going back to the Halloween movies, right? The 2018 Halloween movie was a sequel to the original Halloween movie, and so they had to really be respectful of how that would have happened, to the point where like Michael Myers' mask was damaged in a way that happened in that first movie, right? So I feel like in the last maybe 10, 15 years, they've done a lot better with being respectful to the source material.
Agreed.
You know what I mean? So,
agreed.
And it sounds like Scream is the same way. Again, I haven't seen the newer ones yet, but it sounds like they're very similar vein.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, listen, let's go ahead and kind of score and wrap this thing up here. Now, what we do here on the show is Eric likes to essentially compare the film to a beer of some type, and well, last week it was Halloween compared to a Sierra Nevada IPA.
Pale ale.
Oh, pale ale. Excuse me, not an IPA. But this week, man, how do you compare Scream? What are we comparing to when it comes to craft beer?
Yeah. So as for rating, I'd say I'd compare it to what most prefer is the original New England IPA.
Okay.
So although beer is technically the beer that I'm referring to is a double IPA, much like the one we're talking about, the Imperial double IPA, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm rating this beer the heady topper of slasher films.
Okay.
And the two beer nerds that are listening to this, one of them being me, and one of them somewhere else in the world, I was like, oh my god, yeah, that's right. But the reason for this rating, heady topper is from the Alchemist Brewery. It's an incredible brewery in like Stowe, Vermont, up in the middle of upper middle Vermont. It's an incredible place. But what it did is it completely reinvigorated the IPA genre.
Okay.
Right? With this flagship beer. So much like Scream reinvigorated and reinvented somewhat the slasher genre.
Yeah.
So basically beer, and I kind of look at it this way, right? So the horror genre kind of got stale somewhere in, I'd say probably the mid to late 80s, when
I would say late 80s, probably
maybe late 80s, where like you had all the reboots of Halloween and Friday the 13th and
Nightmare on Elm Street was wrapping up at that point.
It all kind of like blended together and sucked. Like at the same time, not at the same time, but like when you parallel it to beer, specifically IPA, there were like these hot wars of like the early 2000s where these brewers, and specifically like in the West Coast, were like trying to like cram as many hops and cram as much IBU, which is like the bitterness, into an IPA to make it as almost as undrinkable as possible. But it was like, but almost it felt like, it was like one of those like hipster things, right? Yeah. And so they're like trying to like make it as intense as possible. And then Heady Topper came around where they had like the same hopping, they had like the same beer, but they made it incredibly drinkable.
Yeah.
And they also made it like a hazy, what most people consider now is like a hazy IPA, like a super immensely, like the one we had 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Super drinkable, super like just, quaffable, whatever, right?
Yep.
And they kind of like started that. They like reinvigorated that genre.
I like that.
So, kind of ties all together.
Absolutely. No, and it's funny because that's exactly what Scream did, right? It reinvigorated the slasher genre for at least a little bit longer because I think by the time we get to the mid 2000s, it kind of falls out of fashion again. But of course, they're back again making new Scream movies, so who knows? And they're making Halloween movies, so yeah. I think that's a fantastic comparison. I think that's very apt. And for me, again, my thing is I do a basic thumbs up or thumbs down. In this case, I will give this a thumbs up.
Just one thumbs up.
I think just one thumbs up. I like the movie.
Okay.
I don't love the movie. Like for you, for years I've known you love the Scream franchise. Sure. I like it. I don't love it because, we'll put it this way, if it was a beer, I wouldn't have more than one before I'm like, yeah, I'm good.
You're a traditionalist.
I guess I'm a traditionalist, right? Whereas, because again, I don't have memories of this as a kid other than watching the early scenes of Casey getting gutted and then moving on because that was just too much for me.
And then completely bitching out and walking out of your girlfriend's house.
I totally bitched out. Yeah, I did. So I it's good though, but I will say, again, if you've seen Scary Movie, and you're just watching this for the first time, good luck, because it's really hard to get through it without laughing and thinking of Scary Movie first, which, good on Scary Movie, right? And, but it's hard to watch this subjectively. But if you can, and you can appreciate it for all the subtleties of what it brings to the table in terms of 80s horror and slasher, homages, then it's fantastic.
Yeah, so basically if you're extraterrestrial and this is your first time on planet Earth and you've never watched any movie ever and you really want to watch slashers.
Oh my God. No.
Do not watch Scary Movie before you watch Scream.
No, watch Scream first.
It will completely ruin the movie for you.
Yes, but it's a good movie. Like I said, I can't, last week I gave Halloween 2 thumbs up because that to me is like the ultimate classic slasher film. I don't think I could watch this movie every year and not get sick of it because it just... I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Absolutely. I like it. It's good, but I feel like there's probably...
the cast is incredible, though.
The cast is incredible because...
Matthew Lillard, Skeet Ulrich.
Absolutely.
Courtney Cox.
Well, and Nev Campbell's one of my high school crutches. Yeah, I've always loved Nev Campbell. Oh, man. That was good. It was a good discussion, man.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of Generation S. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Beer Before Fear. So that's a podcast I put out every 2 weeks. So there's not a new episode every week, but every other Friday there will be a new episode. In fact, just this last Friday, I put out an episode with Eric on the movie Hellraiser from the 1980s. Remember that movie? The movie was weird, man. But if you want to hear our thoughts on it, make sure you check that out. I will make sure to include a link to Beer Before Fear in the description of this podcast episode so you can check it out and listen to it however you're listening to this one. And here on Generation S, we will be back next week. Beth and I will be back next week, I should say, to do another movie review, actually. Another Halloween-themed movie. I don't want to give too much away, but I will... how do I want to put this? It is a staple 90s Halloween movie. That's all I'm going to say. So make sure you're listening for that next week. You'll get to hear our thoughts on it. And until then, happy early Halloween, happy spooky October, and we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.